My name's Callum. I'm 27, and this mess started with something as small as a comment at Sunday dinner. I was home for the weekend, mostly to help Mom with some things around the house, since she's been having back problems. My younger brother, Jerome, was there too, lounging on the couch with his phone like he usually does, scrolling endlessly, probably messaging friends about who knows what. Our dad passed away a few years ago, so it's usually just the three of us. But Mom has this habit of turning every family gathering into a passive-aggressive competition. Yesterday started normal enough. Mom was fussing over lunch, Jerome complaining about the food. I was in the middle of explaining a project I've been working on at my small business, trying to avoid talking about how I've been quietly saving and investing money I inherited from Dad. Jerome, as usual, interrupted. "Why do you even bother with all that?" he said, waving a fork like it was a sword. "You're never going to make as much as I do. Just let me handle things. I'm better at money, better at business, everything. You're slow, Callum. You can't keep up." I froze for a moment because, honestly, I wasn't expecting him to be that blunt in front of Mom. Jerome's always had this entitlement about him. He graduated from college 3 years ago, barely scraped by, and somehow thinks that makes him qualified to lecture everyone on how life works. Mom just sighed, looking like she was trying not to pick a side, which, knowing her, was her way of hoping I'd back down. But something in me snapped. Not angry snapped, more like precise, calculated. I leaned back in my chair, smiled faintly, and said, "Fine. You want to take over everything? Go ahead. Everything is yours." There was a pause, and I swear I could see Jerome's smugness falter for a second. Mom's face went pale, really pale, and she whispered, almost to herself, "Everything? Even the savings account?" I took my phone out, opened the banking app, and swiped to the account that Dad had left me years ago, the one I had been keeping untouched, the one Jerome assumed I didn't know how to manage. Mom gasped, Jerome's jaw dropped, and the tension in the room thickened like smoke. "Yeah," I said slowly, savoring the moment. "Everything. You want to handle it? Go ahead. You take over all the accounts, the investments, the savings, and while you're at it, maybe you can start paying for your own lifestyle. Mom and I have been supporting you for years." Jerome stammered, trying to come up with a retort, but nothing came out. Mom started pacing, muttering under her breath about how this wasn't what she expected, how she thought I would just play along and let Jerome run the show. She kept glancing at me with that mixture of fear and disbelief, like I'd suddenly become someone else entirely. And the best part? I wasn't bluffing. I've always been careful, quiet. I've let Jerome run around thinking he had it all figured out. I never challenged him because it was easier to stay under the radar. But yesterday, after years of seeing him mock me, condescend to me, and even try to manipulate Mom into thinking I was incapable, I realized the stakes were mine to set. Mom tried to intervene, saying something about fairness, about family first, but I stopped her with a calm, measured tone. Family first doesn't mean being used, Mom. It doesn't mean pretending someone is incompetent just to make them feel in control. Jerome, you either step up and take responsibility for everything, or you step aside. It's your choice. Jerome was furious. I could see it in the way his face turned red, his fingers drumming on the table like he was about to explode. Mom looked like she might faint. And me? I felt free. Like years of quietly being underestimated had been compressed into this one moment. And finally, I had control. He opened his mouth, probably to argue, but I held up my phone again, showing the app with all the numbers visible. Not aggressively, not triumphantly, just factual. Everything. Yours. If you think you can handle it. The silence that followed was electric. Mom couldn't speak. Jerome was fuming silently. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that all the little games, all the passive-aggressive digs, the comparisons, the constant belittling, they were ending now. Or at least, they were about to. Jerome's reaction caught me off guard, but only slightly. I'd expected anger, maybe a little yelling, but what I didn't expect was the mix of desperation and arrogance that suddenly washed over him. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing, and he said, almost too calmly, "You really think you can just hand over the accounts to me like that? After all these years?" I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't think. I know. You've had your chance. You've had years to show me, Mom, that you could handle responsibility. But all you've done is sit around, complain, and demand. If you want it, you take it. Don't act like this is a favor. Mom interjected, her voice trembling. Callum, maybe we should just. No, Mom. I cut her off gently but firmly. This has to happen. Jerome needs to see that consequences exist, that actions have weight, that life doesn't bend around entitlement. Jerome's face twisted in disbelief. You're serious? You'd really do this? I nodded, my expression calm. Completely serious. For a few moments, Jerome didn't speak. He was fumbling with his words, shifting from foot to foot, and I could see the panic beneath his confident facade. Mom looked like she was caught between wanting to stop this and realizing, deep down, that it had to happen. She muttered something about how maybe she had underestimated me, how maybe I was smarter than she thought. Then Jerome leaned forward, suddenly vicious. Fine. I'll take it. I'll take everything. But don't think this ends here, Callum. You think you're clever, hiding behind numbers and apps, but you're going to regret underestimating me. You think I won't fight back? I smirked faintly, almost indulgently. Fight back? Jerome, you don't even know where to start. You've spent years pretending you know what you're doing. Now's your chance to prove it. Or fail spectacularly. Your choice. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling dishes and glasses. You're insane. You can't just. Yes, I can. And yes, I am. The room went quiet for a long minute. Jerome's chest heaved with anger. Mom's hands were clasped tightly together, like she was trying to ground herself. And me? I just watched, feeling this odd mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. It wasn't just about the money. It was about control, recognition, and making my family see that I wasn't a passive player anymore. Then Jerome did something I honestly didn't see coming. He stormed out of the kitchen, muttering under his breath about lawyers, about Dad's legacy, about how this wasn't fair. Mom sighed, half relieved, half worried. I knew him well enough to predict that he'd come back with a plan, and probably a loud, over-the-top confrontation designed to shame me. So I sat down, opened my laptop, and started reviewing the accounts, just to make sure everything was in order. Mom hovered nearby, biting her lip, still pale, and finally asked, Callum, what happens if he actually messes things up? I didn't look up. Then we deal with the consequences. That's life, Mom. And maybe, just maybe, Jerome will finally learn that nothing is handed over without responsibility. The next morning, Jerome returned, and he brought reinforcements. Not real reinforcements, but the kind that made the situation more stressful. Aunt Muriel, our cousin Ezra, and a few of Jerome's friends who, for some reason, always seemed to enjoy stirring chaos. They filed into the living room like they owned the place, eyes flicking between me and Mom, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. Jerome was practically bouncing with rage and excitement, clearly intending to make a scene. You really think you can do this alone, Callum? Jerome asked, voice dripping with mockery. You think Mom is going to let you take Dad's money and run the show? Think again. Aunt Muriel smirked, glancing at Mom. Oh, darling. Maybe you finally realized Callum's not the golden boy you always wanted him to be. Maybe he's finally stepping up. Ezra, who had always enjoyed pointing out my failures at family gatherings, chimed in. Yeah, Callum, let's see how long this little power trip lasts. You've been under Dad's shadow your whole life. What makes you think you can suddenly take over everything? Mom didn't say anything this time. She looked exhausted, caught in the middle of everyone's venomous glares. I knew she was thinking about how much she'd tried to shield me, how much she'd hoped Jerome would take responsibility, but it was too late for hope. Jerome leaned close to me, lowering his voice like he was sharing some great secret. You've got no idea what you've started. You've made enemies today, Callum. Big ones. And you don't even know it yet. I smiled, calm, collected, even though my heart was pounding. Enemies? Maybe. But they're the kind I've been waiting for. Every joke, every insult, every time you try to make me look small, it all comes to this. I've been quiet, Jerome, but I've been watching. And now it's your turn. And that's when he did it. Jerome made the first move, a calculated, aggressive attempt to undermine me, to show everyone in the room that I wasn't capable, to seize the accounts before I even had a chance to protect them. He lunged for my laptop, shouting, "Give me that. You don't know what you're doing." I grabbed it first, and then the room erupted into chaos. Aunt Muriel was yelling at Mom. Ezra was trying to grab my chair, Jerome was shouting, my mom was crying, and I just sat there, holding the laptop like it was the last piece of evidence that I was no longer the one being underestimated. I could feel the energy in the room shifting, like it had become its own living thing. Every shout, every gasp, every whispered accusation bounced off the walls, making the house feel smaller and heavier. Jerome wasn't just angry. He was panicked, and panic makes people reckless. That was my edge. He lunged again at my laptop, a little more forcefully this time. Like if he could grab it, he could erase the months of careful planning and management I'd done. I shifted my weight, holding it just out of reach. Jerome, I said calmly, even as my pulse raced, this isn't a game. You can't just take things because you're loud or because you've convinced people for years that you're in charge. This is real. You want the accounts? You have to earn it. Jerome froze, as if he'd forgotten that words alone couldn't force me to hand it over. Aunt Muriel, who had been leaning against the doorway, snickered, a sharp, cruel sound. Oh, Callum, always thinking you're clever. You've hidden in shadows long enough, haven't you? It's time someone showed you what real power looks like. Mom flinched, biting her lip, but she didn't stop them. She had that quiet, conflicted look, the one I recognized from when I was a kid and Jerome would break the rules while I got lectured for being careful. But I had learned to use her silence as my shield. Ezra stepped forward, smirking, clearly enjoying every moment of the tension. You know, Callum, maybe you've been handling the accounts, but I don't think you've considered just how complicated this is. Investments, savings, bills, taxes. Jerome could handle it all in a week. You're just pretending. I looked at him, steady and unflinching. Ezra, you've never handled anything that wasn't handed to you. Jerome hasn't either. That's the difference. I've been learning, watching, preparing. You're all so busy talking about how I'll fail that you don't realize you're about to watch me succeed. Jerome's face turned red again, half from anger, half from embarrassment. He looked to Aunt Muriel, hoping for some support, and she leaned in, whispering something that made him nod. I couldn't hear her words clearly, but I could tell she was feeding him a plan, probably something manipulative, designed to humiliate me in front of Mom and make him look like the rightful heir to responsibility. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with Jerome. I was dealing with an entire team of people who had spent years training themselves to undermine me, to manipulate Mom, and to control the narrative of who I was supposed to be. And for the first time, I understood the full scale of what I'd been up against my whole life. Jerome stepped closer again, forcing the confrontation into a physical space. You think holding a laptop makes you smarter than me? This is Dad's legacy. You can't just... Stop, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of any of you. You've all had your chance to run things. You've had years of Mom covering for your mistakes. Now it's different. He froze, perhaps realizing that his theatrics weren't intimidating me, and I seized the moment. Slowly, deliberately, I tapped my laptop screen, opening the account details, highlighting recent deposits, interest, and investments. I leaned back, giving everyone a clear view. All of this, every bit of it, I've managed myself. Every decision, every risk, every careful calculation. You think you can just step in and do better? Prove it. Show me. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't tentative, it was charged. Jerome's jaw tightened. Aunt Muriel's smirk faltered. Ezra shifted uncomfortably. Mom looked like she was caught between pride and fear, and I realized she was watching me the same way I had watched Jerome for years, wondering if I could handle what had been denied to me. Then Jerome snapped. He lunged for the laptop again, this time with all the frustration and entitlement he had bottled up for decades. But I was ready. I held it steady, stepping back, my grip firm. Stop, Jerome, or you'll make this worse for yourself. He froze mid-lunge, breathing hard, his hands trembling. And then, suddenly, he did something so calculated it made my blood run cold. He pulled out his phone. I knew exactly what he was planning before he even dialed. This wasn't about negotiating or reasoning. This was about escalation. He was calling someone, probably a lawyer or a family friend he thought would intimidate me, to try to force me to relinquish control. He was using people because he couldn't win on his own. Mom gasped, muttering, "Callum, don't." I didn't respond. I just watched him, holding the laptop like it was the last line of defense against everything he wanted to take from me. Jerome's finger hovered over the call button, and I could feel the tension coiling tighter, every second stretching longer. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. And then he pressed the button. Jerome's call rang out across the room, loud and deliberate, like a declaration of war. I didn't even flinch. I had anticipated this move. In fact, I had been waiting for it. While Jerome's fingers fumbled on the screen, I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair, letting the tension settle like a heavy fog. Mom shrank slightly, muttering that this was all going too far, but I ignored her. She needed to see that boundaries mattered, even when family crossed them. A few seconds later, Jerome was talking into the phone in that high-pitched, pleading tone he always used when he wanted to seem like the victim. I couldn't hear everything, but enough words floated through. Callum, he's not in his right mind. Dad's money. Someone has to stop him. The usual chorus of manipulation, the way they always tried to frame me as unreasonable or incapable. I smiled quietly to myself. If Jerome thought I hadn't considered how he would try to use others against me, he was dead wrong. I had been planning this for months, quietly documenting every transaction, every careful decision, every small victory I'd made managing the accounts. I had backups, legal proof, and a full paper trail. Jerome's theatrics wouldn't work, not this time. When he hung up, he turned to me, face red and eyes wild. You think hiding behind numbers will save you? You think your little accounts make you untouchable? I said, calm as a lake at dawn, that you've finally met someone who isn't afraid of you. He scoffed, pacing the room, muttering threats under his breath. Aunt Muriel and Ezra were whispering now, clearly plotting with him, trying to figure out how to spin this in their favor. Mom sat frozen in the corner, hands clasped together, looking as if she wished the floor would swallow her whole. That was the moment I realized I had to act. Jerome wasn't just an entitled sibling. He was a strategist, and if I waited, his allies would find ways to ruin me, to make me look like the bad guy. I tapped the laptop screen, opening a folder labeled Jerome Oversight. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything: spreadsheets of every account, screenshots of all transactions, detailed notes about investments, and even past attempts Jerome had made to interfere that I had quietly documented. You want to challenge me? I said, voice low but cutting through the chaos. Then let's do this properly. Let's make sure everyone sees the truth. Jerome's face froze, the words hanging between us like a noose. What do you mean? I mean, Jerome, I said, leaning forward, locking eyes with him, that everything you've done to manipulate, to undermine, to belittle me, is on record. Every attempt to twist Mom, every insult, every lie, it's documented. And now, if you want to play, we play in the open. Aunt Muriel gasped. Ezra's smirk faltered. Mom's mouth opened, but she couldn't find words. Jerome's knuckles turned white on his phone, as if gripping it would help him regain control. You're bluffing, he hissed. I shook my head, clicking on the first file. Not bluffing. Here's a list of every time you tried to take control of Dad's accounts and failed. Here's proof of every time you made reckless decisions, the ones Mom covered for. And here, I said, opening a spreadsheet that summarized everything in clear, irrefutable numbers. Here is everything I've done correctly while you were busy complaining. Jerome's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. Aunt Muriel whispered furiously, clearly trying to concoct a counterattack. Ezra leaned in, curious but cautious now. Mom's eyes flicked between us, horror and relief fighting for dominance. I let the silence hang for a moment, then continued. If you want control over anything, Jerome, you have to prove that you can handle it without dragging everyone into chaos. Every mistake, every misstep, every attempt to manipulate, it's out in the open. And if you fail, well, the world gets to see why you were never ready. Jerome's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone again, probably considering calling someone else, maybe even a lawyer, trying to intimidate me into surrendering. I didn't flinch. I knew exactly what he was doing. That desperation was a sign of weakness, and weakness is easy to exploit. Go ahead, I said softly, almost gently. Call anyone you want. Show them what you've been scheming, what you've been hiding. Because when they see it all, the truth, you'll have no allies left. And Mom, I said, turning to her, they'll finally see why I've been handling this for years. Jerome froze, phone hovering in midair, his confidence crumbling. Aunt Muriel muttered something about intervention, but the words fell flat. Ezra shifted, suddenly uncertain, no longer the cocky cousin who always pointed out my mistakes. The room had changed, It was no longer just a fight between siblings. This had become a full-blown reckoning, and I could feel it in the air. Then Jerome made the next move. He lunged toward the laptop, trying to knock it off the table. But I was ready. I had anticipated this exact moment, had rehearsed it in my head 1,000 times. I grabbed it firmly and held it high, out of reach. "Enough," I said. The authority in my voice made everyone freeze. "One more step, and you'll see exactly how far I've gone to protect what's mine. Every document, every note, every backup. I've anticipated this. I've been ready." Jerome stepped back, breathing hard, glaring daggers at me. Aunt Muriel muttered something under her breath, clearly frustrated. Ezra's smirk was gone entirely. Mom was pale but watching me with something I hadn't seen in years, a mix of awe and recognition. I realized at that moment that I had shifted the balance of power completely. Jerome no longer ruled this house. I did. And yet, even as I felt that satisfaction, I knew the war wasn't over. Jerome wasn't the type to give up easily, and now he had allies whispering in his ear, urging him to take drastic measures. I had seen his patience snap before. This time, it would be calculated, relentless. And I had to be ready for it. I sat down slowly, opening the laptop fully this time, showing the accounts in meticulous detail. "I've been careful, Jerome. I've been quiet. I've let you think you were ahead. But now you see the truth. And the truth is, you have no leverage here." He lunged again, and this time, I didn't just hold the laptop. I stood, planting myself firmly between him and the screen. "Jerome, step aside," I said, "or face the consequences of trying to take what's not yours. Every ally you think you have, every plan you've made, I've already considered it. You're on my turf now, and I play to win." The room went completely silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to pause. Mom's hands were trembling. Aunt Muriel looked furious and panicked. Ezra shifted uncomfortably, and Jerome's entire face was a mask of rage, fear, and disbelief. Then Jerome did something that made my blood run cold. He reached under the table, moving for something I couldn't quite see, and whispered, "If you think you've won, you haven't seen anything yet." I froze for a moment, staring at Jerome's hand moving beneath the table. Whatever he was reaching for, it was clearly meant to intimidate or sabotage me. But I didn't panic. I had spent years planning for moments like this, quietly preparing for every potential attack. Slowly, I shifted forward, gripping the laptop even tighter. "What is it, Jerome?" I asked calmly, my voice steady despite the tension that filled the room. "You're shaking, afraid of a few numbers and the truth." Jerome's hand emerged, holding a stack of papers, a fake document, clearly forged, claiming that I had mismanaged the accounts, that I had withdrawn money for personal use. His face was red, eyes blazing, waiting for Mom and the others to take his side. I leaned back slightly, letting them look at it. Mom's gasp was audible. Aunt Muriel's smirk quickly faltered. Ezra leaned forward, curiosity replacing confidence. Jerome's entire expression screamed victory. I tapped the laptop, pulling up my meticulously maintained transaction history. "Go ahead, Jerome. Let them see it all." Mom leaned closer, squinting at the screen. Jerome opened his mouth to interrupt, but I was faster. I projected the spreadsheets onto the wall using my laptop's display. Every deposit, every transfer, every investment, all in plain, undeniable detail. I even included screenshots of all the previous times Jerome had tried to manipulate Mom, with dates, times, and evidence that it was him attempting to interfere. Aunt Muriel's voice broke the silence, shrill and frantic. "Callum, that's impossible. These are your records." "Yes," I said simply. "Everything is here. Every time you've tried to undermine me, every reckless idea Jerome has had, it's all documented. And now everyone can see it." Jerome's face turned from rage to panic in seconds. His plan had relied on Mom and Muriel believing him over me, but the proof was overwhelming. Ezra's eyes widened, clearly impressed despite himself. I stood fully, walking toward Jerome slowly. "You wanted everything, Jerome. I offered it. I gave you the chance to prove you were capable. Instead, you've tried to deceive, manipulate, and threaten. And now, you've lost your only leverage." Mom swallowed hard, finally speaking clearly for the first time in the confrontation. "Jerome, I didn't realize. I was wrong to shield you all these years. Callum, you've been responsible, careful, and honest. Jerome's jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue. I didn't let him off the hook. I leaned closer, keeping my voice calm but sharp. Mom, I don't want forgiveness or excuses. Jerome, I'm not here to negotiate. You've made your choice. You chose deception and entitlement over responsibility. I tapped the screen one final time. Everything Dad left me, the savings, the investments, the accounts, it remains under my control. And you? You'll have no access until you can demonstrate you are capable of managing anything without trying to manipulate or threaten me. Which, based on past behavior, will never happen. Jerome's face twisted in disbelief, then fury. You can't do this. This isn't fair. I smiled, the kind of calm smile that comes from knowing the upper hand is absolute. Fairness is earned, Jerome. You've spent your life mocking, undermining, and taking what you didn't deserve. I'm done letting that happen. Everything is mine because I've worked for it, planned for it, and protected it. You can scream, threaten, and sulk, but the truth is visible for anyone to see. And everyone has now seen it. Aunt Muriel and Ezra both looked embarrassed, realizing the plan to publicly shame me had backfired spectacularly. Jerome sank into a chair, defeated, rage simmering but impotent. Mom's hands trembled as she wiped her eyes, finally seeming to grasp the reality of the situation. For the first time, I was the one in control, and it was unassailable. I took a deep breath, closing the laptop and locking it. This ends today. Jerome, any further attempts to manipulate or access these accounts without permission will have legal consequences. I've consulted lawyers before, and everything is documented. I am untouchable now because I've covered every possible angle. Jerome opened his mouth, probably to argue further, but I didn't let him. I simply nodded to Mom. We're done. The accounts, the investments, the decisions, they remain under my control. Everyone else, you stay out of it. That's the only way forward. He slumped back, seething silently. Aunt Muriel muttered something about family loyalty, but no one supported her. Ezra gave a tight-lipped nod, clearly defeated, and Mom finally exhaled, looking both proud and terrified of what I had become in their eyes. The room was silent, heavy with tension, but the power dynamics had shifted completely. Jerome, Aunt Muriel, and Ezra had been exposed for what they were: manipulative, entitled, and incapable of genuine responsibility. And I had finally taken control, methodically, decisively, and without hesitation. By the end of the day, Jerome had retreated to his apartment, seething. Aunt Muriel and Ezra left shortly after, quietly, knowing their schemes had failed. Mom sat with me for a long while, acknowledging the truth without needing to say much. I had won, completely, and there was no forgiveness or compromise offered, not from me, and not deserved. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of freedom. The accounts were secure, the money untouched, and the family finally understood that I was not to be underestimated again. Jerome had learned, painfully and publicly, that entitlement and aggression are no match for preparation, intelligence, and a carefully executed strategy. By the evening, the house was quiet. I sat back, watching the sunset, the phone beside me buzzing with updates from the accounts I now fully controlled. The sense of satisfaction was immense, but more than that, it was absolute. The family dynamic had shifted irreversibly. I was in charge, and no one, not Jerome, not Aunt Muriel, not Ezra, would ever challenge that again. I had taken control. I had exposed the villains. And, for the first time, the power was finally mine. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.